Hiemstra, Futurist.com. We're talking to writer, social critic, James Howard Kunstler, author most recently of World Made by Hand, a novel about the end of the oil era. Prior to that, a number of books, including best known perhaps The Long Emergency, also kind of about the end of the oil era and what it would mean to society. So, Jim.
Glenn.
Saturday, I'm in a seminar sponsored by an organization that tries to look at the 1,000-year future.
Good luck.
Yeah, I know. And a guy stands up, and he does, University of Washington scientist, stands up and does a really nice presentation on the end of the oil era, and he's the author of Global Fever or something like that, and global warming, and the nexus of those two things. First response is from a participant in the seminar who's an ex-Republican candidate for governor in the state of Washington and a radio talk show host. And he says, of course, everybody here knows that it's a complete myth that we're running out of oil. He said, this is a known, scientifically accepted fact, and only those who are crazy don't accept that as a scientific fact.
Well, he obviously gets his news from The Onion.
Yeah.
You know, he believes that the Earth has a creamy nougat center.
Yes.
I don't happen to see it that way.
Give us some, people hear about peak oil. It is, in fact, sort of generally accepted now, but give us, in your, 10-sentence kind of summary, where are we now, do you think?
Well, we're seeing evidence that demand is exceeding supply. We're seeing evidence that the Saudi Arabians cannot get more out of the ground every day than they've gotten in the past. The Russians have announced just as of last week that their oil production has peaked, and the Russian authorities themselves announced it. It's not like somebody went behind their back. We know that virtually all the great producers are past peak. But, it's not about running out of oil. It's about what happens to the complex systems that our daily lives depend on as you go over the slippery slope of peak and into depletion, permanent depletion. And what we discover is that these complex systems, like how we produce our food, how we do trade and commerce, how we do finance and capital deployment, how we occupy the terrain, how we move around the terrain. All of these complex systems tend to destabilize and are destabilizing, and we're seeing it actually happen. And the instability that we see in one system, like the transportation system, is ramifying the instabilities in other systems like food production or the suburban living arrangement. The problems in finance are affecting food production, all kinds of capital dependent activities, including the oil industry. Problems in the transport sector are affecting the way people live in suburbia. It's affecting the way the big box stores and chain stores will operate because they're deeply dependent on just-in-time deliveries of merchandise that is circulating around the interstate highway system on the warehouse on wheels. So these systems are all interconnected and interdependent, and they will all enter their own phases of failure as this system, as this set of problems moves forward.
So when the independent truckers a couple weeks ago, in response to $4 diesel, said we're going to stop driving for a day, with some mixed success, what did you think as you watched that?
What I thought was, obviously, these guys cannot keep on delivering loads that cost them $1,500 and get paid $1,200 for doing it. They're not in a charity delivery business, and what you're seeing is our way of moving stuff around North America is failing. We're going to have to move more stuff on rail and on boats. And we're not prepared for any of these things. I had an example of it just this week. I've been flying a lot to do book promotion, and 4 small airlines have gone out of business just in the last 10 days. I was in Minneapolis when Delta and Northwest announced their merger, and Northwest is has its headquarters in Minneapolis, and they serve a lot of the small cities in that part of the country. And so there was this great fear all over that part of the country that the cities like Duluth and Grand Forks and Wausau, Wisconsin, were going to have their service drastically cut down once Delta took over. Instead of once a day flights or twice a day flights, they'd only have once a week. Well, you know what? We are completely unprepared to shift this action to the railroads because we've neglected the whole railroad scene. And we desperately need to rebuild the railroads. We're not doing anything. So, the airline industry, in short, is visibly crashing. And as that occurs, by the way, it will affect plenty of other systems. It's going to affect the tourist industry, which will cease to be a major industry, as we've known it in many parts of the country. This is really serious.
Give us, I know it's really dangerous to put timelines on these things, but what is your sense of frames going forward as to, will we see a partial recovery of these systems and, the so-called long plateau of supplies that sort of keeps us limping along for a long time, or do you think that as soon as a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, we'll be really in deep shit in terms of some of these systems? Yeah,
I think that within about 18 to 36 months, we're going to have very serious problems, especially with the oil, and we can see this. There have been a couple of new subplots to the oil story since I published the Long Emergency in 2005. One is, we've discovered that the oil export rates, that the exporting nations, that their exports are going down more steeply even than their depletion rates, for the simple reason that they're using more of their own oil. They're buying more cars. Their populations are still growing. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, Russia, the biggest oil producers in the world. They're sending out less oil. Also, we're seeing oil nationalism start to really change the scene and change the landscape of the oil markets because more countries are withholding oil from the futures markets where it's auctioned off, and they're creating favored customer relations with other countries that they want to do business with. And we're going to tend to be less favored among some of the oil-producing nations. So we've got a problem there. What we're probably going to see, the next thing on the agenda for us, and I think in the next 18 to 36 months, will be spot and regional shortages of oil and gasoline. Right now we're in a funny situation because just in the last 90 days we've seen the price of oil go up maybe 10% or more. It's today as we speak, it's about 117, I think, a barrel. 2 weeks ago it was 105. So this has been pretty severe. But people assume that, it's all about price shocks. No, it's going to be about something else soon. There will be a new wrinkle called shortages, called gasoline lines, rationing, because that will happen. Hoarding behavior, which is going to really create a sort of toxic social kind of element to this. So
we had a case here locally. A guy was arrested a couple weeks ago who had gotten codes to gasoline pumps and was going around with barrels in the back of his pickup at night and had, I think the number was, had stolen as much as 60,000 barrels of gasoline. I mean, really 6,000 gallons of gasoline.
Oh, 6,000.
And sold them to friends at half price over time. And
a cheeky fellow.
Yes. I thought, well, that's the beginning of somebody trying to subvert.
Well, we both know that people are very resilient and resourceful, and they'll do all kinds of things.
Tonight on Nova, Click and Clack, the auto advice guys,
the car guys,
are going to wander around for an hour to the electric car makers and talk about the electric car and its potential future. Why are we not going to build our way out of this with alternatives?
Well, this is one of probably the central delusions that we're seeing right now out there, is the idea that, we can magically come up with a rescue remedy to continue running the interstate highway system and all of the other accessories and furnishings of the happy motoring system. I happen to think that we're going to be very disappointed about that. In fact, there are a lot of intelligent things we can do. But one of the least intelligent things we can expect is that we're going to continue the happy motoring. And the problem is that none of these things really scale. You know, you can demonstrate that you can run cars on hydrogen, you can run cars on cow shit and use French fried potato oil and all kinds of things. Can you run 230 million cars and trucks on those things? Forget about it.
Or 2 billion worldwide.
Yeah. You know, forget about it. You know, we're not going to do that. And so it's a matter of scale. And then you get into political questions like, well, if driving only becomes something for the elite, you know, actually you can look at it a little differently. Okay, right now, let's say 4% of the adults in America can't drive for one reason or another. You know, they're blind, they're economically disadvantaged, you know, whatever. You know, what happens when that number becomes 13%? Or 27% of the people can't participate in the happy motoring system? You know, do you think that that's going to be politically okay? It's going to create huge resentments and grievances and against the people who can still continue to do it. So
it might even be starting just based on price alone right now.
Yeah, you know, I don't think we're quite there yet right now, but we're going to get close to having political problems with this.
I saw a number of interviews just in the last week of happy motorists saying, I just really can't drive anymore.
Oh, I see what you mean.
As much as I can because of $4 gas.
Well, it is, you know, between that and the price of groceries, you know, there are going to be far fewer trips to the Target store to buy other stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to talk about McMansions too, and in your blog. And by the way, Jim has a terrific blog. Just Google James Howard Kunstler blog, and you'll find it. In a blog sometime late last summer, as the credit crunch was beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You wrote something along these lines, almost a verbatim quote, that we're at the end of the suburban build-out, and this is going to come as a great shock to everybody in the American economic system, which is so dependent now on continuing the suburban build-out to run the whole economy. And I've put that quote up in front of some real estate and some builder audiences and so on, and their eyes get kind of big, and they don't quite believe that. But talk about take a neighborhood of McMansions and describe what that neighborhood is like in 5 or 10 years.
Well, let me actually talk about this a little differently, you know, because I think we have to approach it differently. What's going on out there now is, you know, first of all, we created this so-called new economy. Okay, it wasn't really a digital economy, it wasn't an information economy, and it wasn't really a service economy. What we did was create a suburban sprawl building economy. And that's what the housing bubble was all about. That was the climax of that economy, okay? And now it's imploding. And what the players who are a part of it, the home builders, the realtors, the mortgage people, the bankers, the business people, the people who fabricate the granite countertops, all those people, they believe that, you know, we're heading into the bottom of the cycle, and sooner or later, we'll start rising out and we'll get back into a more optimistic part of the cycle, and it'll return. And I don't believe that. I think what we're seeing is something different, that the meta cycle of the great suburban project is over. You know, it's over because it's coinciding with an energy crisis that is going to be a permanent energy crisis that's not going to go away. And we're not going to build more housing subdivisions. We're not going to build more strip malls. We're not going to build more box stores or any of the furnishings of suburbia. It's over. This time, the home builders are going down. They're not going to come back. People will build houses, but the production home builders who build, 1,000 at a time with these vast crews, the whole scale of that thing is over. And we're going to be very disappointed to realize that we're basically going to have to reorganize the human habitat in America. And it's not going to be suburban anymore.
Mm-hmm. What will, in addition to being just smaller scale builders, what would be some of the features that we might move to? Because it's inevitable that we'll replace some of the housing stock and redesign some of our communities around something.
You bet.
Go over the next 15 years.
Well, what I think we're going to see is a reversal of the 200-year trend of people moving from the small towns and the rural places and the farms to the big cities. The metroplexes, as they're called, the big suburban, urban agglomerations, especially the ones in the Sun Belt and the West. where you don't have a lot of pre-automobile stuff. Those big metroplexes are not scaled appropriately to the energy diet of the future.
Yeah.
And they're not going to work.
Yeah.
I think they're going to contract substantially. Some of them will dry up and blow away. Phoenix is going to dry up and blow away. Tucson will dry up and blow away. First, there'll be a contest over them between the Anglos and Hispanics. Then they'll both realize that these organisms will not support any substantial population of any ethnic group. In Las Vegas, the excitement will be over. Thank God. What we're going to see, I think, is the places that succeed are going to be the smaller places that are properly scaled for the energy diet of the future, and more importantly, the places that have a meaningful relationship with a productive agricultural hinterland. And the places that don't, like Phoenix, the desert places, these places are going to be in trouble.
So you see more of a then eventual movement back towards smaller towns as compared to what a lot of people assume, and I probably assumed this a lot myself, that people will move from the outer suburbs into the central city.
Yeah, I think
in order to deal with the transportation issues and be able to.
I think that's just
be able to walk and so.
I think that's a simplistic assumption, and I don't think it's going to quite happen that way. I think that some people will move into the cities, but on the whole, I think the cities are going to contract. I think they will densify around their cores, their old cores, and if they're lucky to have them, around their waterfronts. But whatever the material beyond the old core is up really. The jury's out on what the value of that and whether it will be, retrofitted for anything. I think the poster child for this right now is Baltimore, where this is actually happening. You're seeing actually quite a very emphatic rebirth of the very, very oldest parts of the city, the old neighborhoods like the downtown Fells Points, Canton, and the waterfront, which is a very complex waterfront of multiple little bays and inlets and harbors. But everything beyond the very center of the city is just falling apart, and I think that's sort of the poster child for where we're heading. The Sunbelt cities in the southeast, I think we're going to see another phenomenon there because, as I said in the long emergency, what you have in the Sunbelt is a sort of culture of extreme hyper-individualism joined to a romance with firearms and violence. And what it will combine with is, the defense of hyper-individualism with guns, which is not a good recipe for civic cohesion. And that's why, I think we're going to...
To say the least, yeah.
Yeah.
Time frame again. When do you think you'll look back and say, this is really trending or has moved in the direction that I was anticipating? Is it 2020? Is it 2030?
Oh, no, I think we're well on our way now. I would say that we're in the zone of the long emergency. We've entered the zone of the long emergency. Right now, look at the financial sector is going through severe problems of legitimacy. They created a whole set of new engineered financial instruments to make up for the probability that we're not going to be generating the kind of industrial wealth that we were used to. It's turned out that a lot of these novelty financial things are basically swindles, and that the wealth that is represented in them is vanishing. So that's a huge problem. We see the oil price going up 10% in 2 months. That shows that something disturbing is happening in the complex system of the oil markets. We have heard about food riots. Those have been in the headlines. And the price of commodity grains, wheat, corn is going through the roof all over. They've entered uncharted territory. So there's an awful lot that's going on right now that is going to have, is going to send shockwaves out into the months and just the short-term future.
Last question. What will be a couple of ways in which you think, if this all played out as you anticipate that it is likely to, in what ways will we be better off at the end of it all?
Well, I wrote a novel about this called World Made by Hand. I tried to imagine this post-oil future and to do it in a vivid way. There are going to be, I think, quite a few benefits. I think living locally more locally than we do now will be a big benefit. I think reviving local economies that also are intertwined with social roles will be important. I think that a lot of the aggravations of being tyrannized by automobiles, that's going to be a diminishing element of our lives. I think we'll get to know our neighbors better. There'll be less canned entertainment. We'll have to make our own music. We're going to have to work shoulder to shoulder with our neighbors at things that matter. We're going to have to get serious about politics and government on a local level. We can't afford to we can't afford to continue being a nation of clowns, which is what we've become.
Yeah.
A nation of Ronald McDonald clowns.
Yeah.
We don't have the luxury of that anymore. By the same token, all the avant-garde, cutting-edge people, we're not going to have the luxury of being ironic anymore either. Life is going to be a lot more direct. We're not going to have the luxury of designing buildings for our cities that just confound people, and mystify them. And I say that because, I passed the Rem Koolhaas Library in Seattle twice today already.
Yes.
So, I do think that life is going to be different, and we're also going to have to be brave and resourceful.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of the complacency that we see and, Generation X, slackerism, which has continued for, 20 years, I think that's going to be coming off the menu.
Yeah. Well, we're going to find out. We're going to find out in the next couple of years.
I think we'll find out a bit.
James writes his blog, as far as I can tell, every Monday.
That's the schedule.
There is a new blog entry, and he's very faithful.
I don't do it every day, but I try to do it regularly every week.
Every Monday, and I encourage people to find James Howard Kunstler's blog. Look for his novel, World Made by Hand. Look for his earlier work, such as The Long Emergency.
The Geography of Nowhere.
Yeah, Geography
Home
of Nowhere.
from Nowhere, the sequel.
And what was the one at the end, Life at the End of Oil, or what was the title? That was
not my book.
That was not your title? Okay.
I have another book called The City in Mind. Okay. And then I have a whole raft of out-of-print novels that you could find in the discontinued merchandise bin of the Kmart.
Well, you'll find them provocative as any American thinker that's out there today, in my opinion.
Well, golly, you make me blush.
Yeah, no, I don't. No,
or as we say back home, by the Jesus.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Jim. This is Glen Hiemstra. This was Futurist.com, and thanks for watching.
All right.